Hey guys, I'm David from Lightning Boy Studio, and this is part 2 of our tutorial series on how to make a real-time Toon Shader inside of Blender 2.8. This episode will be all about toon outlines. So there's a way to do it with freestyle, but since we want to show you how to make a Toon Shader in real time in EEVEE, we won't cover it in this video. Instead, I'll first show you how to use what is called the inverted hull method, and it uses the solidify modifier to create the outline. We've been using it on our project Dinomancers, as you can see on our character Fang here, and it looks great, but I sort of wanted to have something a bit more dynamic, so I'll show you a second technique you can use, and it's an outline that reacts dynamically to light. It's pretty cool, and you can combine it with the inverted hull method. So even if you know how to do that, you might still learn something in this video. Now, if you haven't watched the first tutorial, I recommend that you do it now, just because I explained some tips and tricks and shortcuts I use. So I hope you guys are ready and excited, and without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so we're right where we left off at the end of the last tutorial. We have our sphere here, our toon material, and our node tree at the bottom of the screen. And let's see how we can start adding a toon outline to this thing. So first thing we want to do is add a new material for the toon outline. So let's click on this plus button here in the material tab, click on new, and then click on principal BSDF, and we want to change that to an emission shader. So you can either click on it or press on E to go faster, and then let's change this to a black. So now if we go to the modifier properties, you want to add something that's called a solidify modifier, and change the material index here to 1. So what it will tell the modifier is whenever they see this material, and sometimes you have an object with multiple materials, so you can have different colors for each outline. So whenever it sees one material, it would use the material that's one material slot after it. So in this case, it will use this outline material. And so if I had -1, it would take the material before it. So the way the solidify modifier works to make a toon outline is it will create a duplicate version of your mesh and extend it outwards. And once you flip the normals, you'll be able to just see the parts that are sticking outside. So you need to click on flip normals first, and it will turn all black. And the reason is we need to turn on a back face culling on our outline material here. Otherwise, what you're seeing is essentially the extended mesh, but not flipped. So if you activate back face culling, now you see only the faces that are sort of inside the sphere, and you can extend them using the thickness parameter. And by changing the offset, you can tell material to either extend this outline inside of the original sphere or outside of it. And if you make it 0, it's going to be dead center. So you can change the thickness, you can play with the clamp value. It will create some sort of a thick and thin effect at the bottom and top here. It looks cool in some cases, sometimes it's not exactly what you want, but in general you want a bit of it. And then there's the vertex group here, which you can use to tell the modifier to only use certain parts of the mesh. So I'll show you how it works. If you go to the object data properties here, there's a vertex group, and if you create one, you can make any kind of selection by going to edit mode. And let's say I'm going to select the top faces here, assign them to my group. I can call it solidify. So if I go back to my my modifier here and I select the solidify group, I can either invert the selection here and change the factors so I only use whatever selection I made. So it can be pretty useful. But oh, and by the way, in the latest version of Blender, for some reason there's a weird bug when you use the solidify modifier. You see how there's sort of a glitchy effect here once you activate it, and it used to work perfectly in the in Blender 2.8 and before, but ever since they changed the shadow engine, there's this weird bug happening, and the way to fix it is to go to your outline material and to change the shadow mode from opaque to none. And so, not sure why it's that way now, but it seems like the duplicated mesh created by the solidify modifier is casting, like self-casting shadow into itself. So it makes this weird effect. So just change this to none and we'll fix the problem. So that's it. This is the so-called inverted hull method. Works very well, but as I told you, I want to show you an alternate way of doing outlines, which would be dynamically reacting to lights. So as you can see right now, when I move the light, the outline stays absolutely exactly the same. So let's see how we can do this differently. Let me just turn off my other lights here and just use my first light for this demonstration. And I will go in my solidify modifier and just change the thickness to something a bit smaller, like this. Okay, and now we'll jump inside the shader editor. So I'll click on my sphere, click on my Toon material, and now I jump inside my node group by pressing Tab. So this is the node group that, so this is a shader that we've built in the last tutorial, and we'll start adding more stuff to it. So I want to create a new frame that we'll rename by going into the item tab here. I'll rename it outline. So whatever new node that we create that's related to our outline, we'll place it here to keep things organized. And the first two nodes that I want are so I'll press Shift A, click, and create a layer weight. It also works if you use a Fresnel node, but I'm going to use layer weight for this tutorial. And then I'll create a color ramp node. Oops, not vertex color, color ramp. So there you go, place it to my outline frame, and I'll connect the, just make some space here. So I'll connect the Fresnel effect to the factor, and whenever in general you want to see, sort of preview what you're doing in the shader editor, you can always just bring this group output here and plug whatever you want, and you'll see what you're doing. So right now I can see what the values I'm changing on this color ramp. So I want to clamp the values to something very sharp that will look like the outline that we had with the solidify modifier. So I'll place these two values very close together and invert it so that the black portion is outside. And okay, so there you go. And then I want to be able to easily change the size of this outline. So I'll create a new node that's going to be a matte node, and I'll change this to power, either by clicking on it, but you can press P to go faster. And then if you change this value, and you might notice it's going to change super fast, so you might want to press Shift to change it by very smaller increments, and so you can change the size of it here. And the reason we want to be able to change the size is because we want to multiply it with the intensity of our light. And the cool thing is, since we're doing this inside the shader editor, we can actually access the light intensity. It's this red channel here, because remember, our light is, well, our key light is casting this red color. So if I duplicate this power node and change it to multiply, I will take this red channel that's being cast by my light, plug it here, and I'll give it a value of, let's say, 12. And then I'll plug this into my power. So now, if I move my light around, and the further I push it, you see the smaller or the bigger the line will be. So it's really starting to be more dynamic, like we want. So so you can change the thicker part with this value here, and you can change the thinner part with our solidify modifier because it still works together. So you can have this nice thick and thin effect that's actually being influenced by our light source. So it's pretty nice. If you want to comp this over our previous material, what you need to do is add a mix RGB node and plug it here at the end. And we want to use this black and white preview here as our factor, and we'll use it to drive the black color of our outline and mix it with the result of our previous shader. So now you have this color here that you can change to whatever color you want, and then you have the previous shader that we add underneath. So that's pretty cool. So it looks great on a sphere, but it'd be great if we could test it on something a bit higher resolution, because facing ratio would always work very well on a sphere, but sometimes on things that are a bit more blocky, the result is not always the best. So let me hide the sphere and bring up this skull object here. That's actually the helmet of our character Fang. So how cool is that? I'll use this dinosaur helmet to show you some problems that you might encounter. So as I move my light here on the side, you see that you see how this black section here appears very fast and doesn't look like an outline. And this is because this is a sort of an angular face on our model, and it looks a bit weird, and we might want to be able to tweak it a bit locally. So the way we could do that is through painting a texture to tell just this region to calm down a bit and just reduce the outline. So I will press Shift A and create an image texture, and I'll place it into my outline group here. So this will be the mask that we'll be painting. And then we want to add this value to our multiply, because remember, the higher the value is and the smaller the line will be. So we want to add a value that we paint to this 15 value or whatever value we put here. The thing is, when we paint, we're only going to be able to paint to a max of 1, because we'll be painting a black and white texture. So we might want to have a node that multiplies the result of whatever we paint with a higher value, so maybe 4. So whatever we paint, instead of being 1, will be 4, and we'll be able to change this if we need to. And then we want to add this value that we'll be painting to this 12 value that we have here. That's being multiplied with, remember, with our red channel from our diffuse BSDF. So I will multiply this, duplicate it, and then change this to add. And so I will add this 4 value to our 12 value, and then I'll plug it here. So painted image, multiplied by something higher, added to our general thick outline that we want, and then this is multiplied by the light, and this will drive the size of our Fresnel effect. So all that's left to do is to paint the texture. So let me find an angle that looks a bit weird, like this. So I will create a new texture by pressing on New and rename this Skull Mask. And then if I go to Texture Paint, click on M to bring up the tool panel, and then you have Skull Tool, Skull Mask, and then I can pick a white color and sort of paint on this area here. And as you can see, right away I can just sort of fix the problem. It's not going to be perfect, but the cool thing is that I can really just change this part if I want to now. So I can affect the thick outline wherever I want on the model in general. And then if I feel like this outline here is too much where I painted, I can just change this particular area and I can paint wherever I want my model. So I think that's pretty neat. So we might want to add our backlight lights now. So you have your backlight, and as you can see, if you move the light now, you have this very thin outline here that you can control with your solidify modifier. You can make it sort of non-existent if you want to, or just have a bit of an edge here. And then if you move it to the other side, it's going to be super thick on this side and super thin on this side. So pretty cool. And sometimes you want your backlight to be underneath your outline, and sometimes you want to have it on top. So if ever you want to have it on top, the only thing you need to do is to switch these two nodes here. So this add node, as you can see, is what's being added from my backlight. So right now it's being comped behind my outline. I'm adding my outline on top. So if I switch the order, oops. Okay. So I'll just plug this here, my factor, plug this here. There we go, there you go. Okay, so now, as you can see, as my backlight goes over my outline, it will go over it, which is pretty nice. And the last thing we might want to do is add some parameters like we did before in the last tutorial to control things from outside the node group and inside the material instead. So one thing we might want to be able to control is the color of my outline. So I'll use my group input to create a new parameter, and then I'll rename it outline color. So now I can control the color of my outline here. And then I'll duplicate my group input and put 1 into my outline. And so I'll create an attribute for, call this outline minus. So this is the value of what we'll paint that will be removed. And then this will be our general outline size. And we want to input for our texture. So I'll delete this texture for now and plug from my group input where I had my texture previously. I'll call this outline mask. And then if I leave this node group and go outside by pressing tab, you have this outline mask thing I can plug things into. And then I'll bring up my image texture that I had previously, my skull mask, and I'll plug it here into my outline mask. So that way I can reuse this node group for multiple materials, and I'll be able to control things differently for each material and plug any texture that I want from here. So as you can see, I can control the size of my outline here and the size of the problematic area with this value here, and change the color and everything. So I hope you've learned a few things, and I just want to say thank you to the 300 people that subscribed to our channel. Really appreciate it, and I'm happy to see that you're enjoying the things that we're making. So I'm looking forward to doing the next tutorials. Let us know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll see you next time.